Yeah, thanks, Divya. Thanks for the intro, and thanks for having me this evening. So I should say this talk's based on an article by a similar name that I wrote a few years back, and I've kind of extended this since to talk about different aspects of my leadership journey. And whilst it was originally kind of penned for those thinking about taking those early steps towards design leadership, I firmly believe a lot of the lessons, principles, and recommendations I'm going to cover this evening apply to any discipline. As Divya said a bit about me, I'll skip this quickly. So I'm Matt, I'm head of product design at Redgate Software. I've been working in user experience and product design for about 14 years. I've been at Redgate for about 6, and I work there alongside peers in our divisional leadership team, who are responsible for engineering, product delivery, and product design, respectively. Prior to that, I worked in a variety of industries ranging from local government, education, gaming, and B2B software. So in this talk, I want to share, I guess it's a very sort of personal story and reflection of my journey into design leadership. And like Marvel's cinematic universe, it's been quite an adventure of discovering one's own superpowers, one's vulnerabilities, navigating the highs and lows, adversities, and triumphs of leadership. Also, like said multiverse, my journey spans a timeline of events and key plot moments. And while the chapter concludes, the saga is often far from over. So reflecting on the past 5 years or so, my leadership journey looked a bit like this. In late 2016, I got the opportunity to move from being a senior individual contributor to taking on a new role in design leadership. I'd read the job description, I was confident in my ability and was successful in my application. I felt pretty good at that point. I'd kind of landed that leadership gig that I was looking for and was sort of riding high on my own personal sense of success. But then fast forward about 6 months or so, and I wasn't feeling so pleased with myself. I was experiencing what I can only describe really as sort of persistent bouts of self-doubt, and that nagging and lingering sense of imposter syndrome. I began to question fundamentally if I'd made the right choice at all in taking the job. And then what followed was a long, hard and winding journey of introspection, adaptation and personal development. Fast forward to present day, now 5 years in, where I'm not ashamed to say that I'm still trying to figure it out really, how to thrive in a leadership scenario. I still find myself regularly self-reflecting, learning and experimenting with my style of leadership. I still look to others in the industry and fall foul of my own inner critic. I often ask, should I be doing more? Could I be doing more? Should I behave differently? Should I be a different or better style of leader? But I have to pause and remind myself that the journey never ends and there is no such thing as perfection. However, I'm always learning, and wherever there's learning, there's progress. So to better illustrate the journey, I'm going to take you through 3 sections of this talk, or acts, where I'll share my views, experiences over the course of my leadership story. So the first is about transition. The second, I'll talk about introspection. And the third, I'll talk about survival. And it's worth calling out that these are my own views and personal opinions as a reflection of my experiences. First off, the day comes when you get that big leadership break you've been looking for, and you finally make that transition from individual contributor to leader. What does that feel like? How did I embrace that transition? And was it actually anything like I really expected? So from my experience, moving into leadership roles can feel a bit like this. It's a massive leap of faith at the time. It's hard to genuinely understand at this point what's both ahead and what you might be leaving behind. How deep is the water? What hazards lie beneath the surface? How will I survive in this new ecosystem? And with a successful career as an individual contributor behind you, switching into a leadership role can feel like a huge and somewhat irreversible decision. So exec coach and motivational speaker Christina Mayer says, a leap of faith is only scary until you land. But from my own experience, that is not entirely true. Firstly, I'm not sure you ever land. You evolve, sure, you grow, absolutely, but landing implies a sense of completeness. Secondly, let's not be naive. It is scary and it continues to be scary long after you land. I still, to this day, face new challenges that are often unknown, and I don't always feel well equipped to deal with those. My view is you just learn to adapt, to accept what you don't know, to become more resilient in the face of challenges, and to acclimatize to embracing the unknown. Professor and author Bill George, quoting John Donahue, sums it up better for me, in my opinion. He describes leadership as a journey, not a destination. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a process, not an outcome. This recognizes that being a good leader doesn't happen overnight, and that most of us, even the most seasoned and senior of leaders, are still on that journey. We're human, we're fallible, we make mistakes. We're all still trying to figure it out. So if leadership is about people and people's views, values, and principles evolve, then it follows that leadership and how we model great leadership also has to evolve. So like me, those actively looking for leadership opportunities are often at a tipping point in their career, seeking increases in responsibility, scope, impact, or recognition. So if an opportunity comes along and you get that break you were looking for, amazing, go for it. But brace yourself for the roller coaster that soon ensues. Your emotions will go into overdrive as the initial excitement wanes and those early signs of imposter syndrome start to creep in. Elation and happiness can quickly shift to a feeling of anxiety and apprehension. And if not recognized early, disillusionment and self-doubt are sure to follow. You'll start to question your decision and suitability for a leadership role. You'll ask, have I made the right choice? Have I left too many things I once loved behind? Will I ever feel confident in this new world of leadership? Can I live up to my own expectations, let alone those of others? Your own inner critic will surface again, and you'll begin to construct a narrative about your fit and suitability for that role. And no matter how many times you hear, it will be fine, you'll be great, give it time, you still feel like an imposter. But that is all perfectly normal, I promise. As with any new job or role, it's the inevitable anxiety of doing something new, something outside your comforts, something we're not immediately familiar with. But it's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to feel like the proverbial fish out of water. Remember, this is the journey, and the journey is just beginning. So make no bones that the road ahead is long, tough, and at times intrepid. You might discover along the way that leadership isn't for you, and that's okay. Leadership isn't for everyone. There may be another viable path that's a better fit for you and your personal goals and career aspirations. But if you do decide to take that leadership track, and if you do decide it's the right choice for you, I can assure you it can be an immensely rewarding experience. So I took that leap and I decided to move into a leadership position. I rode that emotional roller coaster and came out the other side. I committed myself to the idea of leadership and that learning that lay ahead of me. But I'd learned some hard lessons in the process, some of which I'd like to share with you now. So these are what were for me, and still are probably, those 5 hard lessons of leadership. So 1, downing the tools of your trade. 2, the lagging indicators of success. 3, people become your primary concern. 4, trust is key to empowering others. And 5, the ability to traverse the business landscape. So first off, and as I say, probably most impactful for me personally, was having to make peace with downing the tools. That is one of the trade-offs you'll inevitably have to make if you step further away from the craft and into a leadership position. The temptation can be to hold on to these tightly, but you have to learn, and quite quickly, to ease your grip. As an individual contributor, irrespective of your profession, you'll likely be familiar with a stack of common tools, platforms, and services. Let's face it, 70% of your working week was likely spent writing code or implementing designs within these platforms. You'll become a master of the craft by learning how to leverage these tools to do your best work. You learn every workflow, workaround, technique, and shortcut. They became an extension of you and an embodiment of your working day. But unfortunately, these tools won't necessarily arm and equip you well for your leadership role. You have to develop a whole new set of soft skills to survive and thrive in leadership. This represents a pivot from craft and process to the mastery of people and relationships. But it actually runs deeper than just putting down the tools that you use daily. There's a real and genuine sense of those hard-earned skills, be that coding, design, research, whatever your background, starting to erode. It's a scary thought to feel like you've stepped away from the skills as a maker, which were once an expression of you and your professional achievements. These are the skills that you've likely practiced for years, the skills that probably positioned you for this very leadership role. And you repeatedly ask yourself, should I have to let go of these to succeed? What if I get left behind by the industry and those around me? Can I still hold on to elements of my craft and practice without being a practitioner? There is a very real sense that aspects of your former skill set end up in the metaphorical toilet at the bottom of this landslide. But we have to learn not to hold on too tightly, to try and embrace the unknown, to develop a new set of soft skills, and to find a different way to express our maker roots. Number 2, your success as a leader is inherently laggy. So like Dr. Strange, you'll have to think strategically, bide your time and learn to operate across different timelines. The reward and recognition for your leadership efforts often takes a lot longer to come to bear. You'll have to work hard to keep your motivations high, manage your own expectations through a new pace of work. So leadership initiatives and any form of change management can sometimes feel like you're trekking uphill in boggy mud. Your efforts become less tangible, less tractable, and may fall flat of obvious conclusions or endpoints. Your work will often play out in the form of larger, more complex change initiatives, and those often come with the challenges of organizational politics and stakeholder management. Significant endeavors will likely require lengthy change management processes, relying heavily on your ability to persuade and influence. Whilst the scope for change and impact is greater, you have to be mindful of how you manage your own expectations, effectively conditioning yourself for a degree of mental, physical, and sometimes emotional robustness. So there's a big difference between transformational improvement initiatives and high-touch, high-cadence product work. So as an individual contributor, it's possible to get a real and regular sense of feedback and pulse of gratification from your work. There's that more immediate dopamine hit of shipping some code or sharing a new prototype and the response that ensues. An obvious and immediate sense of progress. You likely operate in these tighter feedback loops that naturally justifies and reinforces the value of your efforts. However, as a leader, and when faced with challenges of organizational change and practice improvement, these initiatives likely play out over months as opposed to days or weeks. This can leave you feeling overwhelmed, disconnected, and worse still, demotivated. You're eager to see how things will play out and the impact your work has, but the end state or a sense of done is out of sight and sometimes altogether out of reach. Number 3, people, not the work, become your primary concern. So no longer are you judged on your individual merits and successes. Leadership becomes about putting people and your team first. So leadership is first and foremost about being selfless and investing a significant proportion of your time and effort in the development and well-being of others. As such, we have to step back from more of a myopic view and our own self-interests, where people rather than the work become the focus of our attention, where their best interests are paramount, where we place individual and team needs above our own, and where we inspire and motivate rather than direct and command. So this is our super awesome design team here at Redgate, all working remotely, as you can see. And my role as head of design is to empower and enable these folks to succeed, to create the right conditions and environment in which they can thrive and grow, to amplify their efforts and direct their energies towards where they can have the greatest impact. And most importantly, to make sure they're happy, engaged, and fulfilled by their work. I'm a better leader where they're motivated and empowered to do their best work. And I fail as a leader if I default to telling them what to do. In short, I succeed when they succeed. Number 4, trust is hard-earned but key to empowering others. And you'll need that by the bucket load if you're going to succeed in that transition to leadership. To scale your impact, you'll have to start letting go of more things. You'll need to trust in your team and in turn earn their trust in you as their leader. So there is, I believe, a linear relationship between trust, individual respect, and a sense of empowerment. The more we develop trust, the more we can learn to flex our leadership style when it's right and reasonable for us to do so. As such, trust becomes a gateway to individuals' growth and personal success. Without trust, we fall into a trap of micromanagement and more directive styles of leadership. And the more we default to a directive leadership style, the more we inhibit an individual's ability to stretch and grow. Trust is often born out of this balance between autonomy, accountability, and opportunity. I've illustrated this relationship here over on the right, which I've called the triangle of trust. Here, opportunities will be sparse if folks are not seen as accountable for execution or delivering on or making progress towards an agreed outcome. Inversely, however, those that demonstrate high accountability have more latitude and scope with a greater sense of autonomy. But trusting in others can be hard, really hard, particularly if you've largely been reliant on your own personal drive and motivation to succeed up until that point. I've heard a few leaders talk about a metaphor for trust as something akin to a petrol gauge. In other words, something that fills or depletes over time based on various interpersonal interactions. In my case, starting out in a leadership role, my trust gauge seemed to default to red more often than not. People have to earn my trust, and I found my tolerance for trust can be quickly eroded, perhaps too quickly. But without trust and a willingness to let folks earn it, you cannot thrive and grow, and they cannot thrive and grow. With a depleted tank and running on empty more often than not, you become a single point of failure. As Simon Sinek said, a team is not a group of people who work together. A team is a group of people who trust each other. You have to set the tone as a leader. You have to be willing to trust others and to foster a model of trust in and amongst your team. Resist the temptation to jump in, to micromanage, and give folks the scope and latitude to show why you hired them in the first place. Number 5, business objectives are your objectives. So as a leader, you also need to be a conduit for context and the objectives of the wider business. Leadership, therefore, requires you to frame your goals and those of your team in a way that connects the practice to what the business is trying to achieve. As such, you'll need to help translate business concepts, navigate organizational constraints, and traverse wider commercial and political concerns. So for me, certainly in the early days, this was a huge culture shock. As an individual contributor, I was somewhat shielded from the business concerns, and it's probably fair to say I was quite naive to the system around me. Leadership conversations with peers and executives often came with its own language. For the first time, I was exposed to concepts of profit and loss, growth and retention targets, financial forecasts, constraints, and budgets. For a long time, if I'm honest, I felt like the only non-native speaker in the room. I felt somewhat marginalized by my lack of commercial acumen and rudimentary understanding of the business. I knew design as a practice inside out, but I didn't appreciate where and how design fits into the wider system of the business. As mentioned, this is a fundamental shift in perspective from one that's likely very inwardly looking, where your purview is localized and focused only on your individual contributions, to one where your purview is now more team-oriented and organizationally centric, where you now have wider responsibility of keeping yourself and the team somewhat aligned to the bigger picture. As you transition into leadership, you'll need to start asking, where does your team or practice fit into that bigger picture? With that context, you can start to see the wider role you and your team can play in furthering the goals of the company. But it's a stark shift from what is a naturally more myopic, inwardly focused view of the world to thinking about things systematically. So the reality of the role set in, you've come to terms with the differences between being a contributor and this new world of leadership. You've introspected and decided to stay the course with leadership. And you've come to terms with the need to adapt to your new surroundings, embrace the new, and grow as a leader. In this section, I'll share some of the personal adjustments I've made to survive and hopefully thrive in leadership. Number 1, applying your craft to new challenges. 2, developing a new set of soft skills. 3, establishing intermediate goals. 4, empowering others to succeed. And 5, being a conduit for context. Firstly, find ways to apply your craft, your origins to new challenges. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest hurdles for me was that sense of my skills eroding. I'm a designer by trade, but how does that translate to the world of leadership? Here, I think there's strength in being able to turn the fundamentals of your practice towards the challenges of leadership. Whilst it's certainly true that you'll likely spend far less time in your tool or platform of choice, I believe there's a distinct advantage to you and the business in applying those core competencies to wider business and organizational challenges. To that end, you'll need to pivot from thinking about how you improve the craft to how you apply craft more strategically. So as Abraham Lincoln once said, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. As a result, you'll need to focus more of your time and effort on how you and your team sharpen that proverbial axe. Furthermore, as a leader, your job should be to also question whether an axe is indeed the right tool for the job. Again, to amplify your impact, you'll need to think and operate more systematically, applying the principles and practices of your skill set to a new set of business challenges. So for me personally, as a designer or former designer, I had to take a big step back from working directly on product and experience design, where my role is now a few steps removed from the day-to-day design work. And I've had to be okay with that. The challenge for me is now one of how do I apply problem solving, creativity, visual thinking, and other types to functional or organizational challenges. For example, how might we better develop and grow designers at Redgate? How might we evolve and iterate on our organizational structure and design configuration? How might we better integrate research and design into our wider operating model? Here, I'm able to apply the principles and fundamentals of the craft to a range of different contexts. While I might be hands-off day to day, I'm still able to leverage my practice and perspective where applied to a whole new set of problems. As part of stepping back, there's also both challenge and reward aplenty working through your team. The opportunity is not to do the work yourself, but to be a great coach and to help others do their best work. Ceremonies like walkthroughs, critiques, show and tells, peer reviews have allowed me to keep one foot in the craft whilst being at arm's length of the work day to day. It allows me and the folks I now manage to challenge the team, both in terms of their thinking and execution, to identify where individuals need support or at a meta level where we have gaps across the practice. I now play a role in connecting the dots between interdependent streams of work and overarching challenges. But there's certainly an art to doing this well, in being present, in challenging the team to think differently, but without imposing my own personal views. Again, it's that fine balance of helping folks pause and reflect without dictating a solution, to help people find new and potentially better angles, but without solving the problem for them. Secondly, you need to work hard to hone and develop that new set of soft skills. Leadership represents a shift from a focus on hard skills necessary to be a great craftsperson to the soft skills, or better still, people skills necessary to be a good leader. You'll need to expand your leadership toolkit to invest in and grow these fundamental interpersonal skills. And since people are different and unique, be prepared for that to be a diverse and highly adaptive toolkit. As I said, the tools you once knew and loved, the tools that got you here, won't necessarily arm and equip you well for a leadership role. Like hard skills, these interpersonal qualities such as decisiveness, persuasion, compassion, and assertiveness need to be learnt, practiced, and refined over time. Look back at your first piece of code or first design is similar in leadership terms to looking back at your first one-to-one, pitch for resourcing, or presentation to senior leadership. Don't expect these things to be great off the bat. Accept the failures, learn from the mistakes, and invest hard in developing and applying these foundational principles around people skills. But above all else, great leaders have to be great communicators. As Winston Churchill said, it's the difference between mere management and leadership. There's an art to when to listen and when to broadcast. There's sense in silence and maturity in patience. Don't leap in. Don't be the loudest voice. Give others time and space and a platform to be heard. Your job is to provide clarity and remove ambiguity. to intrinsically engage and motivate people around the work to be done, to provide vision and direction that inspires others to take action. Communication takes many forms: writing, public speaking, one-to-one discussions. You won't necessarily be good at all of them, but mastering the art of communication and leveraging different mediums will eventually be one of your greatest strengths. Thirdly, learn to establish intermediate goals and milestones. It's important from the get-go to manage your own expectations, to quickly become accustomed to that long tail of gratification associated with leadership challenges, to manage through the inertia of what might initially seem like unbounded and insurmountable challenges. To do this, you'll need to learn to climb each peak one at a time, to establish those achievable interim objectives, whilst at the same time keeping your sights set on the end game. The key is to chalk these interim steps or milestones up as personal victories, each bringing you one step closer to that ultimate goal. To get there, you'll need to be determined and resolute in your vision and seek gratification from a sense of progress over the end result. So whether it's changing a policy, trialing a new team structure, or introducing some new tooling, change management projects are hard. Remember, this isn't about being autocratic and making decisions others simply have to live with. It rarely works that way. Instead, your job is to persuade and influence a critical mass of folks that a new way of working is better, to engage and motivate based on the merits of the initiative, not simply because you said make it so. Again, these initiatives can seem daunting and insurmountable, and the temptation is often to shortcut and circumvent. But often doing things right and well is a slower and harder approach. Models and frameworks like ADKAR, as illustrated, allow you to deconstruct initiatives and think about the phases or stages necessary to lead through change. Developing good change management practices adds another string to your leadership bow. Fourthly, recognizing the need to actively empower others to succeed and overcome the anxiety of trust and delegation. As we've discussed, empowering others means learning to take a step back, giving people the space and latitude to grow. This means practicing effective delegation and establishing the foundations of trust between you and your team. But as I said earlier, this can be difficult, and on the face of it has a high margin for error. From the outset, you'll question if you should step back, when you should step back, and finally, to what degree. In the early days, you'll need to establish your tolerance for delegation, but you have to start somewhere. Otherwise, you'll never be able to scale your impact as a leader. Worse still, you'll end up closer to that directive micromanager archetype, both pissing people off and limiting their growth in the process. Again, lean into frameworks like this delegation matrix to identify smaller, lower risk delegation opportunities. Build confidence and trust in your people and pay attention to their skill sets and growth trajectories. Gradually start to relax your positions, supporting and stretching individuals as appropriate. Finally, overcome that apprehension necessary to sponsor folks with more complex opportunities. Release the reins slowly, see what your people can do, stretch as appropriate, and then allow them to thrive. But please do this mindfully and intentionally. Delegation is not about abdication. Neither is it a way to offload the work you simply don't want to do. Don't make it the leadership equivalent of putting your rubbish in your neighbour's bin. Your primary driver should be to give others the opportunity to stretch and grow with your care and support. That requires you to put your needs and interests, their needs and interests ahead of your own. To accept that there is every chance they will do a good, if not better job than you might have. After all, again, what is the point in hiring great people if we're not going to give them an opportunity to shine? Lastly, be a conduit for context. Having started to acclimatize to the language of business, in your new leadership capacity, you'll often need to act as a bridge between your team, senior leadership, and interdependent departments and functions. Your leadership role changes your perspective, providing a view of that wider landscape in which you and your team now operate. You now play a role that is one of helping to radiate context and drive alignment. So it follows in this new world, you'll need to become something of a conductor, guiding and course correcting where appropriate. You now hold a mental model of the wider organization and a system in which your practice operates. So armed with that context, your job is to steer the ship and challenge those efforts that don't align with or clearly support your local or global objectives. Here you should always be asking yourself and the team, how does our work ladder up to what the company is trying to achieve? How are we as a team or function contributing to the goals of the business? How do the changes within the function impact the system that we're part of? For good or bad, your new superpower is perspective and context. As artist Kenneth Nolan once said, for me, context is the key. From that comes understanding of everything. With the gift of context, you have an obligation to use that to better support, guide, and when necessary, focus your team. To better frame opportunities, helping both challenge and rationalize those all-important whys. To better communicate financial, business, and social constraints that help guide appropriate decision-making. To provide your team with direction and drive alignment, communicating the broader longitudinal direction of travel. And to help direct yours and the team's efforts to where they'll have the greatest impact, creating credibility and demand. So in closing, I can't attest to be a great leader. I'm not even sure what that really means. As we've said, leadership is a journey, and I'm by no means the finished article. But what I can do is share a few parting pointers for what I believe makes at least a better leader than I was 5 or 6 years ago. So the first one, be genuine, be authentic. Your authenticity will engender trust. Show that you're vulnerable, show that you also make mistakes, show that you're human. Being vulnerable is not a sign of weakness. Don't hide behind a mask of who you think you're supposed to be. Instead, bring your whole self to work every day. Learn to adapt and be resilient in the face of new challenges. Roll with the punches of leadership. Use those adversities as opportunities to learn and grow, but please look after yourself in the process. Being a leader doesn't make us impervious to our emotions. We're all soft, squishy humans inside. So we need people to look out for us as well. Trust is hard, but you have to give to receive. Bias a little more towards trust, even if that feels uncomfortable at first. You hire great people to rise to the occasion. Be prepared to step back and let them succeed. Resist the temptation to micromanage or interfere. Instead, create the conditions for success. Leadership is hard, but it's hugely rewarding. Watching your team grow year on year, for me, is a true mark of great leadership. Behind the veil of professionalism, we are all just people. Your job as a leader is to invest in those people. Their growth, happiness, and well-being is paramount. Embrace and actively promote diversity. Hire for and nurture a blend of skills, experiences, opinions, and perspectives, and you'll be a much stronger team for it. Model good leadership and behavioral norms. Build strong, supportive communities. Shield, support, and amplify your team's efforts. Their needs are paramount, so put them above your own. And you might feel like the odd one out. You might feel like no one understands what you do and the challenges you face in leadership, but we're not alone. There are communities out there we can turn to for advice and support. Maybe you have peer-led communities internally. Maybe start your own leadership community. It doesn't have to be lonely. And that is all. As Divya said, we are hiring at the moment. So if anyone is interested, please do reach out. Obviously, I'm available on various social channels. I do a lot of writing on Medium as well. Please do have a look, and also reach out if you're going through that transition that I described yourself, or you're looking to move into kind of leadership roles, because I'd love to hear about your own experiences there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt.
I need to stop sharing somehow. Where's my share button gone? There we go.
Great. Thank you so much. Love the Marvel references. Totally. Great. So we can open up for questions. So if anyone has any questions that you want to ask directly, just feel free to go ahead or just drop it in the chat as well. Any questions so far? We've got something from Simone and Michaela. Yeah, go ahead, Michaela.
I think I really liked your presentation. By the way, congratulations.
Thanks,
My question is, I wanted to know a little bit more, how did you avoid the trap of micromanaging people overall?
Yeah, it's really hard. I think it's one of the hardest things probably to do for anyone that's moving from sort of being a practitioner, so someone that's hands-on, to kind of managing or leading other people, because you've been doing that for years, as I described in the talk, right? So it's really hard to kind of, you become attuned as a designer, I guess, to kind of find flaws in a design or an experience and want to fix them. Your natural urge is to want to fix. So it's very hard to kind of step back. Like I say, I think that thing about building trust, actually, which is, again, is hard. You want to leap in, resist the kind of temptation to do so, step back, and I guess provide feedback, but do that in such a way that isn't you as a leader or manager prescribing a solution. So I think it's right to kind of challenge things where you see that they could be better, but there's that fine balance of not necessarily solving problems for people or directing them towards a solution that even if you think it's right, and sometimes you do, right? Sometimes you look at something and kind of go, if I was designing that, I would do it differently. But I think you have to let people learn for themselves, to find the kind of flaws in their own decisions. It isn't your job to kind of necessarily point them out and point them towards something, even though you might think it is the right and best thing to do. It's just hard. It just takes time. Even now, I still look at things and I think, I wish I could, if I did that, I'd put this there, or I'd have designed it in a different way, or have you thought about X, Y, and Z? And I think it's just those small kind of nudges to help people sort of reflect on their work and to find find it a new way themselves. I don't know if that helps. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Matt. Just going to ask Simone's question. So Simone asks, before starting a career and consequently to face all challenges, what was the event that most made you realize that this was your role? I personally think that before taking whatever life choice, you have to know yourself about that first.
Okay. Challenges. Okay. Is that kind of, at what point did I realize that leadership was the right choice? Is that, if I'm reading between the lines?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah. Again, it's a hard one. Like, I think at the point where I start to see the people around me grow year on year, as I mentioned, that's the point at which I kind of knew that actually, yeah, this is something I actually really enjoy. So, and you have to weigh that up against the other things, like I say, that I think you're trading off by moving from an individual contributor into a leadership role. So if you get your kicks from kind of being down in the detail, solving problems sort of directly from the crafts sort of person side of the work, then sort of transitioning to leadership is hard. If you get your kicks from some of the kind of solving some of those bigger sort of system and business challenges, or helping people around you kind of grow and get better at what they do year on year, then I think those are the things that sort of tip the balance for me. That's almost why I can make peace with, I'm not so hands-on, I put down the tools, because I can see that I'm able to have wider impact, and I'm able to see the people that I work with and respect kind of growing, and in many cases surpassing me in some of the things that they do day to day. And that makes me proud, and that's why, yeah, I don't look back, if that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that, Matt. We've got another question from Nathan. how can you balance the business pressure with the designer mindset to help and support designers?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes down to that kind of conduit point that I mentioned. You now have the advantage of having context. So I understand more about what the business is trying to achieve. My job is to help translate that and communicate that in a way that supports the team. And it works both ways. There's kind of the managing up and managing down, right? At the same, I have to amplify the impact of the team and the team's efforts relative to what the business is trying to achieve. And then coming down, I have to try and translate what the business is trying to achieve into some kind of objectives and opportunities for the team. So I think the benefit of being in that position is you can kind of straddle across the two. You can see the opportunities that are coming, and you can map that against your practice and what you're spending time and effort on as a team, and try and connect the dots between those kind of business goals, business objectives, and how the team's actually spending its time and effort. If I understood the question.
That's great, Matt. Thank you. I've got another question from Michaela. Did you or do you have a mentor to help you and guide you during your leadership journey?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't have one mentor. I've really struggled. I've reached out to people in the past, and I've really struggled to find somebody that I'd consider to be the kind of perfect mentor for me. I think what I've got instead is kind of a community of people that I seek advice and support from. So actually about 3-4 years ago, I went to the first leading design conference that some of you might be familiar with. Off the back of that, I joined a couple of communities, and I have a network of people now in similar kind of positions at different stages in their journey. And I actually reach out to them quite regularly just for help and advice and support in various scenarios. So no, I don't have one mentor. I've kind of got a group of people that I can turn to and seek support from, which I found to be hugely useful. In fact, I don't know what I'd do without that, because quite often, if you're kind of a sort of leadership level position within an organization, there might not be another person in the organization who can necessarily support you. I mean, you can get support from kind of peers in adjacent roles. So I have, again, I can look to my colleagues in engineering and colleagues in product and other areas, and we can sort of infer similarities between challenges. But in terms of design leadership, that community has been a great personal help for me.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. And Michaela's just requested if you would mind sharing those channels as well. So
cool. Yeah, no worries.
Whilst we wait for another question, I just thought I'll ask something for myself as well here. So in my design journey, I'm probably like few steps, behind, of course, and I've got a few years to go to the stage that you're in. But is there anything that you think that, oh, I wish I did this 10 years ago or 5 years ago that would have laid the foundation for you now easily? Is there anything that I could do in that way, would you suggest?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm not sure if there's anything that, I'd have done differently. I guess some of the things that I did without thinking about it at the time, it probably in preparation for when such an opportunity arises, right? That's often the thing. It's like leadership roles are few and far between, and quite often it's an opportunistic thing, right? So something comes up, you need to be in the right position to put yourself forwards for it. So I think anything you can do in the lead up to develop experience around some of the things that I kind of mentioned in the talk will put you in good stead for when that opportunity does arise. So I mean, translating kind of sort of leadership principles into other things, maybe like, I don't know, running or leading a change management project, something like that. Maybe driving an initiative that requires some form of complex stakeholder management. So I think it's finding those opportunities that give you an opportunity to sort of flex aspects of your leadership and leadership toolkit, in the event that when something comes along, you can kind of say, well, I've done this, I've led this thing, or I've managed to persuade and influence this group of kind of stakeholders about how to proceed, or maybe unlock some piece of resourcing, or whatever it is. And maybe you can do that within the context of your job and your role, or maybe you can demonstrate that outside of your role. Maybe there's kind of communities or events or other things you can kind of look to as, again, examples of where you've been able to sort of develop some of those leadership skills, those soft skills that I mentioned.
No, that's great point, because you'd always think that, okay, I'm not ready now, maybe in the next 5 years, but you never know when things would arise within your team or something like that. So it's good to be always have the foresight to plan and prepare. Now it's never too late, I guess. So that's great. Thank you.
Cool.
Any other questions, anyone? I think we're good. Let's look at the time. Cool. I think it's a good time to wrap up anyway. Cool. All right. Give me a second. I'm just going to finish off some housekeeping stuff, and then we should be good to go. Okay. What do you see?
Black screen at the moment.
Oh, okay. Give me a second. It should work now. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Cool. So as we always say, we are always looking for speakers. So please reach out and refer to anyone in your network, or even if you have a topic that you're passionate about relating to UX, UI, or product design, or just literally any self-development topic like today. It'll be great for us to host you as well. So we especially welcome first-timers and friends from underrepresented communities as well. Like in the past, we have kind of hosted many first-timers, which has gone down really well. So feel free to talk to us. It'll be a great opportunity for both of us. And the best way to get in touch would be through our meetup community here, or you can just ping us on our Twitter account as well. And as Matt mentioned before, we are hiring for a mid and senior level product designers. So if you're interested, or if you know somebody in your network, you can check out the details of the job description in the Redgate careers page. And finally, we are on several other platforms. We write Medium blogs regularly. We are on Twitter and we are on Instagram as well. And this recorded video will go on the Ingeniously Simple YouTube channel, and I will add in the comments once it's been uploaded. And finally, as I mentioned, great thank you for all of you for coming here and giving an hour of your evening, especially after a hard day's work. And we are always thankful and grateful for your time. And thank you, Matt, as well. Great insights, amazing talk. And we have a great lineup of speakers coming up next. So please feel free to check out this space. And yeah. Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.